naked eye looks pretty solid. 5-bet full number definitely is something though you want to be concerned about. If you're folding to too many 5-bets, again, it makes your 4-bets a lot less effective. And because in most instances, when you're playing 100 BB stacks or a little bit deeper, most 5-bets are going to be a shove. And so because your opponent has the benefit when they shove of you folding, and also when you do call, they also have equity, given that it's an all-in. If this number is at 50, I think it's probably getting in the a bit too high. If you think about, if you run some calculations with 100 BB stacks, if you're folding 50% of the time to a 5-bet shove, if your opponent has 30% equity versus your calling range, which is certainly possible if, let's say, this is your basically 5-bet calling range. This is the hands you 4-bet for value and will call a 5-bet with. If you look at something like if your opponent is, let's say, 5-bet shoving ace-5 suited, they have almost 31% equity versus your range. And if you run the calculations, if you're folding 50% of the time and your opponent has 31% equity when you call, they've got a plus EV spot to 5-bet, 5-bet shove. So, and there's a lot of hands like that that have like 6-7 suited is 30% equity. So really anytime they have 30% equity or over, when they 3-bet and you 4-bet, they're basically going to have a plus EV play to 5-bet shove. So bottom line is, if that number starts to creep up over 50 or near 50, you're going to be in some trouble because your opponent is just going to have a lot of profitable 5-bet shoving spots. Because anything even like hand like 9-6 suited, it's at 27, which might be pretty close to a profitable 5-bet shove. So you want to be aware of that. Want to make sure you're not 4-betting. It goes back to make sure you're not 4-betting too light so that you are calling enough of the time when they do 5-bet. One money without showdown. Again, I don't think it's hard to really say what a good number is because I think this is just totally dependent on style. Some players have a positive number here, some players have a negative number, so I won't really go too much into that. It's definitely a function of style. I think as long as you're playing pretty decently elsewhere and don't have numbers too out of whack, you should be fine. Like, I think if your 1 to showdown is at like 22, it's quite likely that your 1 money without showdown is going to be pretty bad. But I think if you have good numbers all around, you should be fine. Steal percentage and flop c-bet. Steal, I mean, this is fine. Again, it's a lot dependent on how loose aggressive you are. I think someone with playing 27-21 is going to be a bit higher here than someone playing 21-17 or whatever. But I think you definitely shouldn't be below 30 here. I think there's just way too many profitable stealing spots. I think even more likely you probably should be around 35 or so, if not more. Flop c-bet, I think mid-60s is probably good. You want to be cognizant of not c-betting enough. So if your flop c-bet percentage is like 50 or 55, you're most likely not c-betting enough, although some people do have a more passive style and that works for them. But I think c-betting is such a powerful tool just because the risk reward you get off of c-bet is just pretty excellent. Most of the time people are going to be folding almost half the time to overall c-bets. And given the risk reward, it's a pretty massively plus EV situation for you. Check raise flop, again, check raising is kind of dependent on the player. Some players kind of build it into their strategy more than others. I do think it is a powerful tool to have, and it's something that you should. I think around 10 is perfectly fine. I think if you're like below 5, you probably are missing out on some spots just because, especially if you're ever like flatting out of position, a lot of times. If you check and you never have a check raise in your arsenal, it gives your opponent a lot more incentive just to c-bet a lot wider, just because they don't have to worry about being check raised. So I think 10's fine. You can probably even get away with a little bit higher than that, but I think the biggest thing to worry about is being too low. Flop fold versus c-bets at 48, I think it's pretty average. again, it's tough to say a really perfect number, but I think that's pretty good. Flop raise c bet, I think it's pretty important. I think to be over 10, just because I think there's so many spots versus or a lot of opponents where they c bet way too wide, and you want to have the ability to take advantage of those players. So if your number's at like 5, I just don't think you're taking advantage of enough of those spots, and you're going to have some. You can increase your profits by bluff raising more, even if you're only targeting players that just just c bet way too often. But you also want to be raising enough of c bets so that you've got a decent balance between when you're raising with like sets and big draws, and you're just bluff raising with air. If your raise c bet stats like 3, 4, 5, it's going to be hard to get value when you're raising with your big hand, just because people will tend to give you a lot more credit, and so you want to make sure you got a pretty good balance. So I think anything between 10 and 15 is certainly fine. Even up to 20 is probably feasible. Once you start getting like a 20, 25, it's when I think you're just going to be a bit too high versus observing the players who will